for a few minutes, and then take it down and don't put it up again. Or you can put it up in intermission.
Maybe restore it. Yeah, I don't think they need it in between music sets. Did they get any questions yesterday? I know they pretended they got one, but I don't know if it was real or if it went in exactly what they wanted.
Yes. I know that, I know she got some of this. My wife got some time.
Okay.
So I know
Did
that.
you fulfill it?
Yeah, actually, we played one of the intermissions. Good. You?
Yeah, I feel like you're the one that can screw the most and nobody, like people will notice this, you know, because they don't know exactly.
They don't, well, some of the stuff they'll know.
I mean, what's everything goes.
I just want to point your attention to the screen real quick here. What we have is a number that is on the screen. And that number, you want to pull out your phones, please. And you can enter that number into the text message field as opposed to the like number field instead of an actual phone number. You type in 81010, and then you get in the text line, you type in the @ sign, NewStory F. And using this is going to then send you a message back. It might ask you some questions. Are you a teacher? Are you a student? Are you this or that? Just ignore all that. But it will send you a message back that will then allow you to text our hosts here that are doing their radio show. So basically you're texting live to the radio station, and you can make song requests, like some Christmas songs. You can text your questions that you might have about the topics and subjects that we're hitting on, preferably in relation to Christmas. Would be ideal. And so we're going to leave that number up there for you for just a couple minutes here. And feel free to interact with our show hosts by texting NewStory F or at NewStory F to 81010. Thank you.
Because I don't. I just pulled everything out. We could have just done that being like where he's going to stand. So if he stands in the right spot, he'll be able to.
Yeah.
So once again, real quick, before we get started, feel free to text at NewStory F to 81010, and you can text again your Christmas song requests and questions as the evening progresses. And hopefully they're clean questions. Keep it clean, people. They're going right to Carrie's phone, so. Shower.
Last week, we looked at how climate change impacts northern bird migration patterns, leading older men to migrating indoors, giving a sudden bump to Wheel of Fortune. In short, climate change is impacting Pat Sajak's favorability. Fascinating. This week on NewStory, Christmas.
I'm dreaming of a warm Christmas.
Christmas. Fact or fiction? Tom and Bill will explore this holiday shrouded in mystery this evening. I'm Carrie Betts, and this is NewStory.
Welcome to NewStory. We'd like to examine stories behind the stories on this show. Today is a very special day. We have with us a live audience, and in addition to that, we have our faithful listeners out there in Radio Land. So grateful that you're joining us for this week's episode, entitled A Christmas News Story. Bill, I have to say that you are looking particularly festive tonight.
Why, thank you, Tom. You know, there are only 3 days of the year that my wife lets me wear this sweater. And this is not one of them. But I must say, Tom, that you were looking mighty smart yourself, and it seems like I am the only one here in the Christmas spirit. So, in talking about last week, Pat Sajak, what an amazing American icon.
You know, I don't know how we're going to top last week. You know, the funny thing about it is we talked a lot about Pat Sajak, but we didn't say anything at all about Vanna. Should we do another? Yeah, never mind. Listen, I agree with you. Sajak is an American icon, absolutely, for sure. But this week, Bill, another icon is explored. In fact, this week we're going to explore a Christmas icon.
Santa Claus.
Nope.
The Grinch.
No, I wouldn't touch that one with a 99.5-foot pole.
How about Bing Crosby and Danny Kaye?
Good, I like that one. Love White Christmas, but no.
Of a white.
Come on back to the show, Bill. Although I'd love to investigate some of those things in the future, today, Bill, we're looking at a baby who changed the world.
You are talking about baby Jesus.
You're absolutely right, and we're going to unpack this famous story from
A scholastic perspective.
more or less.
Like a boring book.
More or less. On the left side, probably.
Okay, look, Tom, I was in New York City. I was in Times Square in New York City, and I saw a billboard there, and that billboard alluded to, it led people to believe that Christmas is Christian mythology.
Ooh, guys, I think I know where you're going with this, and I know this story very well. I would love to get in on this talk.
Of course, ladies and gentlemen, that's the voice of our wonderful producer, Carrie Betts, who is normally behind the scenes.
And should stay there.
But she really wanted a little more FaceTime today. So, Carrie, you're more than welcome to chime on in today.
Chime on, you crazy diamond, Tom. This is a really bad idea.
Really like to chime?
All to say, Bill, let's go ahead and get started. Now, to help us out, if you remember last week, we went over like on every segment. So, I've got an egg timer.
We, when he means Tom.
Some of us speak more eloquently and longer than others, and that's okay.
Time out.
It's
Did
just
your wife give you
Did
that
you
egg
start the
timer?
timer?
Yeah, she did.
Who's going to make the eggs in your house?
I'm not going to answer that question, Bill. I'm just going to set the timer and we're going to move on. All right? So we're going to do about 5 to 8 minutes on every segment, and hopefully the timer doesn't go off.
Okay.
If it does,
It's your fault.
it's my fault. So, you know what, Bill? You might be right. That Christmas is, a lot of people maybe think that way, that Christmas is just mythology. It's Christian mythology. But there's a lot to be said for the historical documentation that leads us to believe the biblical account of Jesus. So, Carrie, why don't you, since you're out front today, why don't you tell us the Christmas story that you know, and Bill and I will see how it compares to the historical or the biblical account.
Well, a long time ago, in a Bethlehem far, far away.
In the Millennium Falcon, there was no room for them in the Millennium Falcon for Mary and Joseph, and the innkeeper, Han Solo, was not going to...
All right. It might not be Star Wars, but there is a star. And that star rose above the stable. And in that stable was a manger with a baby Jesus, and 3 kings were gathered around that manger.
Carrie, I'm sorry to interrupt, but that's not exactly how it happened.
Oh, come on, Tom, it's just a story.
You know, a lot of people feel that way. A lot of people that I talk to say, it's just a story. What's the big deal? But listen, if we're going to compare the popular story to the biblical account, first, we need to find out, can the Gospels be trusted?
Gospels?
Yeah, the Gospels. Carrie, at the beginning of the New Testament is the story of Christ, and it is contained in 4 books called the Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
And Luke actually carries the primary account of the Christmas story. See, archaeologists have found thousands of manuscripts of the New Testament, and some of those manuscripts dated less than 100 years after the original letters were written. So let's examine this for a second. We should have a slide.
We're on the radio, guys.
Yeah, they can't see it in their car.
Join us online.
You know what, earlier when I said we have a live audience? Slide. Okay, so, when weighing the reliability of an ancient text, historians look at the number of existing manuscript copies of the original text along with the time gap between the earliest existing manuscript copies and the date that the original document was written.
That was amazingly scholastic. What Tom is talking about here is he's saying, look, for us normal people, the more a topic is written on, and the closer it is to the actual event, the more reliable it is by literary historians.
Yeah, this is referred to in the world of academia as...
Academia?
Academia.
It sounds like a skin disease. Like you woke up, like Tom woke up with academia this morning.
There are worse things I could have than academia.
And it looks good on you.
I appreciate that. So in the world of academia, those that are learned, those that are scholarly, they refer to this as the bibliographical test. So you see a chart in front of you. As you can see, now we're just going to focus on 2 of these because there's a lot of information there and I don't want to confuse everybody. But we're just going to look at 2 of these. We're going to look at Homer's Iliad, and then we're going to look at the Greek New Testament. We're going to compare the 2 of these. So, as you see, the Greek New Testament does extremely well, both in the time gap aspect of only 40 years, and then the number of manuscript copies as compared to all the other historical documents. So a lot of people would say Homer's Iliad is probably one of the greatest literary works known to mankind. Now, if you look at the date it was written in 800 BC. But the earliest manuscript copies that we have of that are 400 years later. So there's a time gap of 400 years. A lot can happen in 400 years. Generations of people have lived and died in those 400 years. Now, there's a lot of manuscript copies, and that's all well and good, but if you look at it compared to the Greek New Testament, which was written between 50 and 100 AD, and then you look when the first manuscript copies were written around 130 AD, we've only got a time gap of 40 years. So what that tells us is that the people that were writing the manuscript copies of the original text were alive and kicking when these events actually took place and when the original documents were written.
So, Carrie, the conclusion one can make is that from a literary standpoint, a historic literary standpoint, the New Testament is considered more reliable than Homer's Iliad and Star Wars.
Okay.
Rejoice, Emmanuel. loudly scream, come and cheer. Our spirits by my Advent here. Disperse the looming clouds of night, and death's dark shadows put to flight. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to you. Oh, it is right. Oh, come thou King of David, come, and open wide our heavenly home. With us that leads on high, and close the path to misery. So rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to you, O Israel. And rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to you, O Israel.
So, hey, before we go any further, how about we give it up for the band? It's not every week that we have a live band in studio with us. So the band's name is the White Woods, and you can check out all of their latest releases on all streaming platforms.
They'll be with us for the next couple hours, so I sure hope they are good.
And they come highly, highly recommended. Although we could have had Casting Crowns.
Wait. We could have had Casting Crowns.
But these guys came cheaper.
And by cheaper, you mean free.
So very free. Okay, so Tom, now that we've examined the reliability of Scripture, what do we know about the human authors?
Well, strictly speaking, the Gospels themselves are anonymously written. However, the early church historically agreed that Matthew, a tax collector and one of Jesus' disciples, was the author of that first Gospel, which ironically is entitled Matthew.
That's amazing.
Isn't it, though?
Fascinating.
Now, Peter had a friend whose name was John Mark, and he was one of Peter's closest friends, and Peter was, of course, a disciple. And John Mark penned the book of Mark, and he penned the book of Luke.
Why isn't he called John Luke? Like John Luke Picard? It's not Star Wars, but it's close.
We could do a show on the whole Star Trek thing, but yeah. Anyway, so yeah, it's fine. But yeah, he was a good friend of Peter's, and he wrote those two Gospels.
Okay. I think it's believed that Luke actually personally interviewed eyewitnesses to be able to write his narrative on the birth of Jesus.
Yeah, and it kind of helps us to prove that these eyewitness accounts of these books were accurate. See, even in the early church, there were skeptics, just like there are today. And there were enemies of the early church that wanted to disprove the authorship of these writings. But any arguments that they had against the authenticity of the Gospels, they fell away. And there was really no dispute.
But couldn't these guys have just lied about it? You know, write whatever they want.
Well,
It happens all the time today.
well, but Carrie, we need to keep in mind that Mark and Luke were not even disciples.
I don't understand what that has to do with anything.
I think what Tom's trying to say is would these be the guys that you would choose to write your biography? said, probably not, they're dead.
I hate it when she doesn't speak into the microphone. So, there were other gospels that were written, and this kind of helps with the authority issue. These other gospels were called apocryphal gospels. And these gospels were...
Hold the phone. Apocryphal. What?
Apocryphal.
Yeah.
So, all right, apocryphal according to Google, because we all know that Google is the most reliable source in the universe. According to Google,
Tom has a
and actually I do have a doctorate in Google.
A PhD in Google.
I'd be willing to bet that a lot of people have a doctorate in Google.
He's a Googler.
Apocryphal.
Can I go on?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. So the apocryphal gospels, according to Google, is a story or a statement of questionable or doubtful authenticity that was accepted as truth. So in other words, Carrie, they wrote these apocryphal gospels so that people would listen. But they were proven to be fictitious. So the books that were put in the Bible that we know today were accepted as being authentic by both historians and scholars. Scholars who agree that the guys who wrote these books were actually giving eyewitness accounts.
So, Carrie, the authors of these books, they were either, of the 12 disciples, they either walked with Jesus or they were part of the very first church. I mean, as Tom said earlier on, this is all very early to the actual event.
So what you're saying is that Luke couldn't have lied because somebody would have said, hey, you're lying?
Yeah, basically, yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. All right. So, I guess what I always figured was that outside of God's people, it was assumed that these writings weren't legit.
Oh, Carrie, they're quite legit.
Oh, very legit. Too legit to quit. So very legit.
Love incarnate, love divine, star and angels giving sign, bow to babe on broken wing, the Savior of humanity. Unto us a child is born, he shall reign forevermore. No doubt, come and see what God has done. No doubt, the story of amazing love, the light of the world.
that we've discussed the reliability of the authors, what if I told you, Carrie, in that book, the Bible, what if I told you, Carrie, that there are pages in the Bible that I want you to remove?
Stop.
Did you say remove? Rip out.
We just spent a whole section on why. Remove, okay.
Tear them out.
So, does like the pastor of this church know about this?
He's about to find out.
Bill, I don't know what to say. I'm really concerned about you.
Okay, hear me out on this one. When we look at the Bible, normally we look at the Bible as this is the Old Testament and this is the New Testament. And the page I'm talking about is the page that the editors, that Zondervan has added in between that says, welcome to the New Testament. I think we need to take that page out between Malachi and between Matthew, because what if I told you that the Bible is one big story, one revelation of God? Carrie, what if I told you that Christmas is found in the Old Testament?
I believe the answer is no. Jesus, I've never seen Jesus' name in the Old Testament. So no. Nope.
Carrie, I think what Bill is talking about here, and I saw what you did there, by the way, I like that. Bill is talking about prophecy.
Exactly.
And prophecy, another name for prophecy, can be foretelling. And what foretelling is a prediction of events that will happen. It's not a guess. It's not throwing the spaghetti up against the wall and seeing if it'll stick. It's foretelling events that will happen. So, there are some scholars that argue that there are as many as 300 prophecies in the Old Testament, and some are more indirect than others, the connection to Jesus, but it is generally agreed by scholars that there are at least 55 prophecies that directly relate to Jesus' life, his birth, his death, and his resurrection.
So you're telling me that this little tiny baby who has done nothing but cry in a manger fulfills 55 prophecies.
I am, absolutely. In fact, see, if Jesus had been born without these prophecies from the Old Testament, it would have been much easier for the people in ancient Israel to dismiss him as what, I can describe it best as what C.S. Lewis, the author, you know who C.S. Lewis is?
Help me.
The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
That helps like so.
Scrutiny.
Mere Christianity, another great book by C.S. Lewis. Well, C.S. Lewis would say that if that actually happened and he was born without these prophecies, you could have put him in one of 3 L categories, the letter L, and loser's not one of them. He was either a lunatic, he was a liar, or he was the Lord. So think about this. The chance of prophecies being fulfilled in one person is like 1 in 600 million, give or take a few. So in chapter 7 of Isaiah, it was written about 735 BC. King Ahaz was on the throne, and Isaiah was sent a message from God that God was sending Judah a sign. And the sign would be a child called Emmanuel. We find that in Isaiah 7:14. It says, all right then, the Lord himself will choose the sign. Look, the virgin shall conceive a child. She will give birth to a son, and will call him Emmanuel, God with us.
And that's what Emmanuel means. The word Emmanuel actually means God with us.
Like the song?
Exactly.
In Isaiah 9, 6 and 7, we find this. For a child is born to us, a son is given to us, and the government will rest on his shoulders. These will be his royal titles. Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. And then even further in 2 Samuel chapter 7, verses 12 and 13, which was actually spoken by Samuel to David, who was the king, when your days are over and you rest with your fathers, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, who will come from your own body, and I will establish his kingdom. He is the one who will build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever.
Wait. Offspring from your own body. Jesus is Mary and Joseph's son. He wasn't born to David. That doesn't make any sense.
What the Bible's saying here is David's great grandson is Joseph. And so Jesus comes from the line of David. And that's prophecy. This is what is foretold, and this is what happened. That's prophecy.
Well, that song really brings up an interesting thought. So, you see, here's something I never understood. You know, that...
Go on, I'm
Tom,
sorry.
you're the keeper.
I know, I have one job.
One job.
So, those shepherds in the field,
Right.
angels, tidings of peace and good joy given to shepherds. I mean, I don't understand. If this is an important, holy message for the entire world to hear, why tell shepherds? I mean, shepherds are smelly. They lay around with animals all day. They, you know, pick their teeth with grass. I don't know. But, I mean, come on. Why would you tell them? They're not exactly the people I pick to, like, spread an important message.
You know, she brings up a good point, Bill. I mean, why the shepherds? I get it. I mean, I know that at one time in ancient Israel history that they were highly esteemed. I mean, David was a shepherd.
David was a shepherd. Abraham was a shepherd. Moses was a shepherd. They very highly on, you know, early on. But as time went on, when we get to Jesus' time, shepherds were actually considered the lowest of the low. They were outcasts.
Yeah. So archaeologists have found something called the Mishnah, which was Judaism's written record of oral law. And there were writings in there about the shepherds. And those writings basically said that shepherds were considered to be incompetent, saying that you should never even feel obligated to rescue a shepherd if he fell into a pit. I mean, try to imagine that for a second. You're walking down the road, you know that there's a pit there. Of course, it's not marked like the potholes in Michigan, but there's a pit, and a shepherd falls into it, and you walk by in ancient Israel, and you go, yeah, I'm not going to dirty my hands to help that guy out because he's a shepherd, right? So, and they're actually documented records that shepherds were denied any and all civil rights. I mean, they couldn't even be witnesses in court. So I have to imagine in my mind that rabbis in Jesus' time, the educated religious leaders of Jesus' time, would have had to have been amazed that God would refer to himself as our shepherd.
And I think that's the point, Carrie. I mean, Jesus came for the outcasts. He came for the lowly. I mean, Jesus himself even calls himself the Good Shepherd.
That's right.
Yeah, okay, but you guys haven't actually answered the question, which is why did angels tell the shepherds? I mean, we didn't get there. Help me.
The reason, Carrie, that the angels told the news to the shepherds, I think, was to signify that Jesus came to save the outcasts and the lowly. Yeah, you're right. They could have told the kings, and it probably would have made more sense to tell the kings and the religious leaders. But they told the very people that Jesus came to save. And we are just like those shepherds because we're outcasts from God.
Child
Gonna set this for 15 minutes. We're gonna take a 15-minute break, folks. Want to mention that there's a photo booth over in the hangar, so if you want to go get your pictures taken, they've got costumes over there, so you can dress up like shepherds or wise men. There's also snacks outside if you're interested in purchasing snacks. Smacks. If you want smacks, don't pay for the snacks. Pretty sure that'll happen that way. And while we're in intermission, those of you who have sent in requests, Eric is going to be playing your requests live. The egg timer is set for 15 minutes, so that means intermission starts right now.
Run.